The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Personal Safety Show. I am Marcus Melnick, your host of Firearm Mentor, and in today's episode we will have, as always, two segments. The first segment will be a smattering of anecdotes, news, firearm updates, firearm tips, and I'm very excited and very much looking forward to the second half of the show where we interview Corey McElroy from Shadow Systems. Shadow Systems is a manufacturer of striker-fired handguns. So be sure to listen to the second half of the show. But let's talk about the first half. As some of the people who listen know, I went to Loyola University, Chicago, and I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in criminal justice. And there's one professor who is going to be on the show in the next couple months, Dr. Arthur Larigio, who was on a panel talking about violence with some other people. And he is very much a victim advocate, one of the most intelligent, brightest people I know in the criminal justice space, and I've kept in contact with him over the years. Fantastic professor. He taught statistics, or as I used to call it in college, sadistics, as a joke, and he made a very dull and boring topic relevant because of his work with the Cook County Department of Probation, where he researched crime and violence and victimization. And today, he's focusing his efforts on being an advocate for victims. Being a university, they're going to talk about, quote, gun violence instead of just violence. Everyone knows I'm an anti-violence specialist, and I focus on all kinds of violence, not just what the liberals call gun violence. But let me tell you a little bit about that seminar, which I found very intriguing. There were four professors. Art Larigio was one of them, and he did not say this, but there were some studies done in Brazil where 50% of the population is brown-skinned, but 75% of police shootings end up with victims or offenders or whomever gets shot of brown skin. So that's disparate. And I kind of got pissed when I first heard that. I was like, no way, come on, that doesn't happen. And maybe my naivete took over. But then I started looking at the numbers and I'm like, oh, you're right, there is a pattern here. And that professor went on to very interestingly say that when we have a white mass shooting victim, or we have victims from a mass shooting and the victims are mostly Caucasian, that's when new laws get enacted. But when the victims are usually minority, dark-skinned, Hispanic, African-American, no laws are made. And that's why, this was his conclusion, that's why the Illinois legislature and governor passed the Illinois assault weapons ban, because white people were involved. Well, I'm not very much a simple cause and effect kind of guy. I think there's a ton of other things at play, other factors and influencers at play, and I'd like to offer an alternative explanation on at least why there was an assault weapons ban after Highland Park, and I have some other examples as well. Maybe it's because the politicians were involved, and possibly got scared out of their wits, so they wanted to do something. But this professor did not cover that. A lot of times, action is spurred by people when it affects us. If it affects someone else, who cares? But if it affects us, that's when we as human beings will actually respond and react. So that was kind of my conclusion. I thought it was very interesting, even though I didn't really 100% agree with everything. And another example is in Winnetka. In the late 80s, Lori Dan was one of the first modern school shootings, and I have got friends and associates and department members and brothers of the badge and sisters of the badge who actually did respond there. Now, that was before my time in criminal justice. I was in junior high, I believe, at the time. But I worked with these people. And following the Lori Dan shooting, several municipalities, including Morton Grove, Winnetka, and a couple others enacted handgun bans. And once again, I would theorize that this is because the people who were decision makers had children at the schools that Lori Dan went after, not necessarily because the victims were white. And I actually am very close friends with one of the paramedics that saved one of the children's lives. Very much involved, at least post-incident involved in studying it and understanding it. And there's a decent book out there, and it's on the Lori Dan story, and I can't think of what it's called, so I will continue to move. So last weekend, my family had a smattering, a ton, back-to-back parties to celebrate my niece and to celebrate my stepson for her bat mitzvah and my stepson's birthday. So I was at the mitzvah, and I was talking to one of the out-of-town guests, and I'm always very interested in politics, as everybody who listens knows, and I met a gentleman, and he works in Washington, D.C., and he works in the political arena. Ooh, that's interesting to me. So I introduced myself, I talked to him, and I said, it's very interesting. What do you do? Well, he does campaigning, he does public relations for candidates such as Bernie Sanders, the Giffords Association, a lot of anti-gunners. And then he went on to say, I hate the people that don't agree with me. I hate the opposition. Use those words, hate. And then he said to me, well, what side are you on? I said, not yours, but that's okay if you have a different opinion than me. And then he kind of backpedaled and started to say, well, I hate the people that show up to Walmart with an AR-15 strapped on their back. And that I can see. I'm a big advocate for concealed carry, where no one else knows that you're carrying a firearm for several reasons. Number one, you're not going to make anyone else uncomfortable. And I know there's a lot of people out there saying, I don't really care if I make someone else uncomfortable. Yeah, but you got to get along in society. We're all here together. We all have different views. I get it. It's okay if somebody is anti-gun. It's not okay if they scream and spit in my face about it. But if their perspective is they don't like firearms, they don't like free speech, they don't like, name it, whatever it is, that's okay. People are always entitled to their opinions. So he kind of put his foot in his mouth. I laughed it off. It's not a big deal. And I explained what I do and how I'm an anti-violence specialist and do more than just firearms. I teach people how to respond. And we ended up as friends, which is good. But very interesting how it's difficult to have a conversation about an issue with an opposing party who literally has a closed mind, absolutely made up their mind, hates it, you're not going to change their mind. And that's why on Facebook I don't usually engage with people in debates, because at least on gun control, they're not going to change my mind. I'm not going to change their mind. If it's an intelligent discourse, which I hope to have with this professor. I don't know if he's pro-gun or anti-gun, but he's definitely pro-victim. He's definitely anti-violence. If he's anti-gun because he's in the field and he knows and he has a deeper understanding than someone who's just listened to the media, he's actually done firsthand research, I would respect that. I respect that opinion. Talking about gun control, let's talk about New Mexico and a recent development. About, 3 or 4 weeks ago, there were two men who were arrested for shooting an 11-year-old boy, and New Mexico's governor signed a controversial gun ban. She said, well, this is a public health emergency, and I have power over public health. Therefore, I'm declaring that nobody can carry a firearm in, I believe it was Albuquerque and a couple of surrounding things, at least for 30 days. And I get it. Her solution was to try to reduce the violence. I get it. But she broke the law to stop violence, which is not cool. So the two offenders were actually in custody outside. They were arrested outside of an Albuquerque convenience store. They were already in custody on a different case, and police found 100,000 fentanyl pills in the offender's vehicle during the traffic stop. Holy cow. That's not like one or two. 100,000 pills. These guys were not nice. So after the killing, basically the Governor Michelle Grisham cited the killing of the people, a couple other shooting deaths, and temporarily suspended open carry and concealed carry laws in Bernalillo County, which includes Albuquerque. It didn't apply to cops or licensed security officers in the state's most populous county, and gun owners with permits to carry firearms were still allowed to have their weapons on private property like their house or gun ranges. So it was aimed at, quote, reducing gun violence, and it was met with a ton of legal challenges and criticism, and a federal judge blocked it. Yay! Governor Grisham changed the order to temporarily ban guns at parks and playgrounds in the county. Okay, Illinois has a similar thing. You can't carry a firearm in a park district facility or at a public park. All right, moving on. Last weekend, the State Line Rifle Association had their annual family shoot. I believe it was also an NRA event, and I got some feedback. People loved it. This is an opportunity for individuals with families to come out and shoot. They don't have to buy any ammo. It's a free event. It's funded. It's phenomenal. I wasn't able to go because, as I said, I had a weekend of nonstop partying. And when you're 50 years old, a party means a nap in the afternoon. So in any event, I digress. I just made a little joke. But it was a great shoot. If anyone needs information on the State Line Rifle Association, whom we've had on the show, please reach out to me at my electronic business card, which is Firearm Mentor Card, CARD.com. All right, moving on to another party. I had a very intelligent person talk to me about violence. And this guy has a concealed carry license. He's a gun guy. He basically said mass shootings are the pandemic, which is very interesting. It doesn't really fit the definition of a pandemic, which is multi-country disease, but I get it. It's a rash of, at least highly publicized because of our wonderful media, mass shootings, victims, people dying. And it's kind of riling up the country. It's riling up the pro-gun people. It's riling up the anti-gun people. It's a big mess. So hopefully someday we can all come together. Now, in understanding this big mess, I found a course taught at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, and that's Wake with a W, not Lake with an L. I misread it, and I was like, ooh, Lake Forest, maybe I'll take a class. Well, the class is taught by David Yamini, and he's received funding from the Louisiana Institute for the Study of American Religion to study church security. He's a member of the Liberal Gun Club, National African American Gun Association, and NRA, and financially supports the Liberal Gun Owners 501c4 and Walk the Walk America 501c3 organizations. He is a sociologist, he's a professor, and he grew up in San Francisco Bay, and he never, ever touched a firearm until he was in his 40s and in North Carolina, and he was teaching sociology. So for the past 10 years, this professor has been deeply immersed in American gun culture, both professionally and personally. So he has 1 foot outside and 1 foot inside the gun culture, and it allows him to see interesting perspectives and the social life of guns from different perspectives, from different angles. And he wanted to convey this diversity to others, and in 2015, he came up with a course called The Sociology of Gun Culture. I actually just sent him a message. I'd love to take the class. I don't think it'll work because I'm in Chicago, he's in North Carolina, and there's a lot of field trips to ranges. So the course doesn't focus on, exclusively at least, on gun violence and politics, but it looks at guns in society, and it begins at a shooting range. So the first class meeting is at a range, and students have the opportunity, but they're not required, to shoot 3 semi-autos, a .22 pistol, a Glock 17 9mm pistol, and an AR-15 .223 caliber rifle. And the field trip is a source of insight and carries through the entire semester. So the course then builds on the students' firsthand experience of guns by exploring the multifaceted role that they play in society. Talks about the historical, the legal, the global context, with the intention to provide students with a greater understanding of the lawful, not unlawful, but the lawful possession and use of guns, gun crime, injuries, and the future of gun politics. There's a ton of guest speakers. They vary from semester to semester, but they include leaders of gun owner groups, professional gun educators and trainers, and representatives of gun violence prevention organizations. This is extremely relevant, at least in my world, this is extremely relevant. It feels though the U.S. is kind of being torn apart by cultural and political divisions over guns, and that's what I alluded to earlier when I said the whole firearm thing is kind of a big mess. So there's something called the gun gap in the different social worlds inhabited by gun owners and non-owners, and they shape fundamental orientation to guns, risk, and policy. But their very understanding of what constitutes a good society may be skewed from their upbringing. Our professor believes that as a society we can't repair this divide until people start talking to each other about their differences with the goal of understanding. These conversations should be built on solid foundations of empirical knowledge, scientific knowledge, data, not an interpretation of data to fit your own narrative. That's my comment. And just basically talking about the role that guns play in society, both positive and negative. It's a well-balanced, at least it's presented to me as a well-balanced course. So the trip to the gun range really stands out because it offers direct, didactic contact with the noise, the smell, the percussion of guns, as opposed to somebody who's never seen a gun sitting in a classroom debating against guns, but they don't have that experience. Now, if they go to the range and they have that experience and they still don't like it, at least they're speaking from a position of knowledge and authority. A lot of people who are repulsed by guns prior to this field trip come to see why guns are so attractive. And those who lacked exposure often become what we call gun curious. Gun enthusiasts who are in the class get their enthusiasm reinforced, and they also start to understand why others see guns differently. Reflecting on this field trip, the gun range, over the course of the semester through the scholarly lens on guns, turns the heat of gunfire on the range into the light of comprehension in the classroom. Some of the materials from the course are books like The Liberal Gun Owner's Lens, Pillar 1, The Human Weapon Relationship. That's by, I don't know who it's by. Next, Gunfight, The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America by Adam Winkler. Gun Culture 2.0, The Evolution and Contours of Defensive Gun Ownership in America, and Handgun Ownership and Suicide in California, and Race and Mass Murder in the United States, which are articles that address negative outcomes with guns in society. So the class, which again is called Sociology of Guns, teaches students to approach the topic in an objective and nuanced manner, encompassing both the everyday uses and abuses of firearms. Look, I'm a gun guy. I understand it. I love firearms. I love self-defense. I love working against violence. But at the same time, I also understand that firearms can be abused. Heck, I live outside the city of Chicago. How many people are murdered with firearms in the city of Chicago on a daily basis or a weekend basis? Now, when Brandon Johnson took over as mayor of Chicago, that first weekend there was a ton of shootings and killings, and people, at least in my conservative world, were saying, oh, yeah, great, we got a great new mayor. Look what happened the first weekend. He didn't even have time to enact any change. Not that I think he's going to, but give the dude some time. Wait 6 months. Look at other factors. What was the weather like? What was the social climate like? You can't blame a mayor or an elected official who's been in office 3 or 4 days for something that happened when they don't have time to enact any changes. Like I said, I don't think the changes will be very positive, but that is just me. Basically, this class, these lessons prepare students to make informed choices for the rest of their lives about being involved with guns or not, as well as the place of guns in communities in which they live. I'm looking at this as an absolutely phenomenally interesting course. I've never seen anything like it, and he's been teaching it for 7 or 8 years, and this is the first I've heard of it. I really am interested if there's an online version of the course. I would love to take it. I'd actually love to speak in his class, and I'm going to try to get him onto the show. I just sent him a message asking some questions, if I can get a copy of the syllabus, and I'd absolutely love to learn what this guy has to say. Now, there are gun owners out there who don't want non-gun owners to teach them. There are non-gun owners that don't want gun owners to teach them. And it's kind of ridiculous. We got to have all perspectives to solve some of the societal problems of violence. Something else interesting happened in the news. This actually would be last week. A federal judge struck down California's ban on magazines holding more than 10 rounds on Friday, saying it's unconstitutional, arbitrary, and capricious. Woohoo! The ban, which adopted through a 2016 proposition, went through various appeals until the Supreme Court sent the case back to the lower courts following the Bruin decision. The landmark decision, Bruin, requires that firearm regulations don't impede the language of the Second Amendment and are consistent with the nation's historical tradition. So U.S. District Judge Roger Benitez, in a Friday decision, that would be Friday a week ago, said the ban on high-capacity magazines, or in my world, standard-capacity magazines, fails to meet the standard that there's no national tradition of prohibiting or regulating firearms based upon the firing capacity or ammunition capacity. He wrote that one government solution to a few madmen with guns makes into criminals responsible, law-abiding people wanting larger magazines simply to protect themselves. I had a conversation with a reporter this past week, and she, not familiar with guns, I actually offered to take her to the shooting range. She said, "Why do people need an AR-15? And I said, wow, I can answer that. If 3 people or 4 people kick in your door, which does happen, and starts to terrorize the family with violence, with rape, with murder, with injury, with theft, what kind of firearm would you want? Would you want a gun that holds 7 or 8 bullets, kind of like a 1911, when there's 4 offenders? Or do you want a gun with 30 rounds? Because if you miss, or if the impact goes to a person with LSD and they don't feel pain, they can still function. Would you rather have 30 rounds, or would you rather have 7 or 8? And she kind of made an interesting face and nodded and saw the perspective. I don't know if she agreed with the perspective, which is okay, but she saw the perspective, which is all I wanted her to do, kind of to get the other perspective. So back to California, the Governor Newsom basically called the judge's decision politics pure and simple. Baloney. Come on, it's a judge. Understand and respect our political system, which is the legislature makes the laws, the executive branch approves the laws and enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. So Governor Newsom, have a seat. The justice system that we are all a part of has decided they don't agree with you, and they are the law of the land, not you, sir. President and General Counsel for the California Rifle and Pistol Association, his name's Chuck Michael. His group originally filed the case along with several private gun owners, because you need private gun owners as plaintiffs in these types of cases. Praised the ruling. He said the clock is ticking on absurdly restrictive laws that violate the Constitution. Billy Clark, who's a litigation attorney at the Giffords Law Center, told CNN that he was confident the decision will be overturned and called the large capacity magazine regulations common sense and constitutional. Look, I'm not an attorney. I'm a layperson who has a little bit of extra knowledge in the firearms arena, but the reality is it looks like it depends on what court system the lawsuits are in. Very recently, Illinois filed a new law signed by the governor that any anti-gun bills that are met with lawsuits have to be filed in one of 2 counties. Now, if that's not judge shopping and completely, I don't know if it's illegal, but wow, unethical, holy cow. I can only file in counties where the judges are mostly liberal. I think it's Cook and Sangamon. I think, but don't quote me on that. That is egregious. That is ridiculous. You should be able to sue someone in the area that the offense or the tort happened. So if I am in Lake County and I'm affected by a gun law, I can't sue any governmental agency in Lake County. I have to go to Cook County, or I have to go downstate to Sangamon County to file a lawsuit. Welcome to the world of ridiculousness. In any event, stay tuned. We have Shadow Systems up next. I hope you enjoyed this update, and we will talk right after the break. But before we do, I just want to let everyone know that I have a concealed carry class coming up in Long Grove is the classroom. Mundelein will be the range on October 21st and 22nd. And you can sign up if you go to firearmmentor.com/classes. There will be a link for you to enroll in the class. I'd love to have you in class. We have plenty of room. There are people who are starting to sign up. I usually don't let people know until 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time because most people don't plan that far ahead. But if you are free and available and interested either in an initial certification or you need a renewal, I'm your guy. Once again, it's firearmmentor.com/classes. And if you go to firearmmentorcard.com, that's an electronic business card. And if you do it on your phone, there's a button where you can save it to your contacts. Once you save it to your contacts, I'm in your phone. I'm your phone a friend. If you throw me a text or you throw me an email, just let me know who you are. I have thousands of people every year. I stopped counting almost 10 years ago at 5,000 people who I interact with and train and schedule classes with. It's a lot of people. So I don't have tens of thousands of people saved in my phone. So just say, hey, Marcus, this is Joe. I'm a listener of your show. Or, hey, Marcus, this is Alex. We know each other from IGOT. Or however we know each other. And then for me, I'll put a face to the name and it will click. So appreciate that. So the way to sign up for classes is firearmmentor.com/classes. The way to contact me is firearmmentorcard.com. Stay tuned. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.